Hey everyone, how are you all doing? Susan Smith here. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. Once again, I'm in a corner of my studio that you seldom see. You're seeing Mr. Producer's desk over my shoulder and my serger right behind me. My long arm is off to my left. Forgive the uglies, the wires and stuff. That's just the way it is in our sewing rooms, right? Different things happening. But today I want to give you an update on my quilted coat. If this is the first time you're catching one of these sessions, this is session number 6, I believe, for sure 5. And they're just short snippets and they're all labeled Making a Quilted Coat. So if you need to look for them, that's the title that you want to search for. And I'm just inviting you into my studio to watch beside me as I go through this process. This is not particularly instructional, but I'll let you know what pattern I'm using, and then I'm just talking through some of the decisions that I'm making, some of the challenges that I'm facing, some of the, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward that I've had to do. But big picture process, I'm using the Noelle coat by the Chic company, and that title is in the description below this episode, so that you can check back and find it. So that's my coat pattern that I'm aiming toward, and it's a swing coat. It hangs from the shoulders, kind of an A-line flared shape. And what I did initially was quilt the fabric, the large pieces, before any cutting into shapes. So quilted the fabric, the area, and with intention, I quilted a border around the hemline of the front and back pieces. Then I cut that as though that quilted fabric were my outer coat fabric. And then I'm proceeding to sew the garment exactly as per the instructions, with a full lining, welted pockets, all the things going on. So as you can imagine, there are some challenges certainly with working with that thicker quilted fabric, and it has layers, and sometimes they can shift a little bit even though it's quilted together. When you cut it, there's it just is a little bit more difficult, so it's taking a little more intention. Anyway, I'm going to say good morning to a few of you, and then I've got a whole bunch of things beside me, notes that I want to talk to you about, and a couple things that I want to show you that I've kind of discovered as I've gone along. So let's see who's tuning in. Peggy and Helen, Judy, Mary Jo from Hungry Horse, Montana. I love that name. Sandy, another Susan. Awesome. Okay, let's talk about it. What do we want to talk about first? One is when I was cutting my lining, and this is the lining, by the way. It's just a scrap. Isn't this gorgeous? I love this stuff. It is 100% polyester, but it's got a nice heft to it. It's a little heavier than your typical lining that you would buy, which is super, super lightweight. I want this to be a little heftier because it's a coat. I want it to have some substance, and it helps it to hang well as well. I've mentioned before, but I'll say it again. A couple of years ago, I made a child's coat, kind of princess line, 50s style, and it was red. And I used this lining, and I loved it so much. And that coat won some ribbons and got so many compliments. When I saw that this was still available at Joann Fabrics, I went and bought more for my gray coat because it's awesome. So this is my lining, but as you can see, it's kind of slinky. So one of the first things I did was, in cutting it, rather than use a scissors for most of the pieces, I actually used a rotary cutter. I have a big mat, I think it's 4 feet long, and so I still had to do a little bit of shifting of my pattern pieces, but using a rotary cutter on slinky fabrics helps because you don't have to pick them up. You don't have to pick them up to pin, and you don't have to pick them up to cut. You can just roll along. So I actually found another purpose for long arm quilting rulers. I just laid flat rulers to keep my pattern piece in place and flat on the top, and then used my rotary cutter. And I found too that honestly using a cutting ruler was helpful. When I just cut freehand, the pattern pieces for this design, I don't have one right here, but they're a bit like parchment paper. They're heavier than your typical pattern tissue paper, and it wanted to push ahead of me a little bit, therefore losing my accuracy if I had a curve. But if I literally laid a cutting ruler on there, even a straight cutting ruler for my armhole curves, and just shift it exactly like you shift it when you're quilting along it, and use my rotary cutter, it worked really, really well. Then I just came back with my scissors and snipped notches or did any really tight curves that I just couldn't get around with the rotary cutter. And another tip, and I know this from my dressmaking years, having shears, mine's got a lot of lint on it, having shears that have a fine serration on the blade, and good dressmaker shears often do, is super helpful because that grips your fabric instead of squeezing it out in front of you every time you pinch the blades closed, it keeps it right tight in place. If you try a pair with serrated blades next to a pair without, you will feel the difference. It's massive. It's really helpful for accurate cutting. So that's just a tip. These are Kai dressmaker shears. I absolutely love them. Okay, a couple more tips on marking. This coat did have a few darts. Here's one. This is kind of it's like a raglan sleeve in the front, so it's the bust line dart. And typically in dressmaking, we would have used at that point a dressmaker's tack, which involves pulling through a couple strands of thread and leaving little tails. And where that little stitch was, that's the dot where the dart would end. But as you can imagine, trying to take a tiny stitch accurately through several layers of quilted fabric was not really happening. I was getting a 1/4 inch wide stitch and like, where in that 1/4 inch does my dart end? So what I opted to do was poke a pinhole through the point of that dart and then use my blue marking pen that I used for quilting. You probably can't see it, but there's actually a little blue mark right there. So I just twirled my pen through that big pinhole, enlarged it a little bit and made dots. So I used that marking process throughout for the various things that I needed to mark. One of them, of course, is the welt pockets. And again, let's see where it is. I don't know how well this will show up on camera. Yep, you can see it. Look at that. There's my welt pocket. And can you see it's got detailed marking? And the thing about a welt pocket, they're not actually horribly difficult to sew, but precision is key. And it's not a thing that you want to take out and redo because it stretches awry and it's almost impossible to get it better the second time. I've learned this from experience. So the best way to approach them is to mark with as much precision as possible. Get those corner dots. Where did it go? There it went. Get those corner dots in place. Get those lines so they're exactly parallel, exactly spaced, so you know exactly where to sew, and nail it the first time. Take your time and nail it the first time. That's my key to a welt pocket. I don't have a finished one to show you, but I have done welt pockets before, so I do know whereof I speak. Anyway, I just used a rolling chalk Chaco marker to mark that. That's the finest thing that I have, but certainly a white type chalk pencil would work. If you were working on something a different color, a quilting erasable marker would work too. And in other places, I used my blue erasable pen, but it's so close, as you can see, to the gray. It's not a really bright, vivid, eye-catching marking. And so I thought I needed something higher contrast to make that welt pocket really perfectly accurate. So I went with the white. Okay, what else was I going to tell you about? Oh, I do know one other thing. I am fortunate enough to have a Laura Star pressing system. It's their smaller one, their lift, which is just one that you can literally lift up in your hand and carry. But the Laura Star system has incredible steam, super fine bursts of steam in the iron. I have found this to be invaluable when sewing on this thick quilted fabric and then trying to press it into a nice smooth dart. So look at this dart from the back. Look how thick and bulky that is. I cut it open as far as I could. I pressed it flat and open, but it's pretty thick. I don't really want an awkward looking seam allowance on the front. And also I don't particularly want to press my quilting perfectly flat, right? That loses the fun of the quilting. So I was able to press these darts actually from the wrong side and apply that steam without a ton of pressure, but to get it down on the table and apply that steam and have it lay nice and flat. Back in the day when I was garment sewing with my mom, we would use a pressing cloth. I know lots of tailors and high quality garment sewers still do. Use a very fine muslin or some type of thin lightweight fabric as a pressing cloth and put it over top of what you're pressing. It keeps the fibers from squishing flat. It keeps suitings, for example, from getting shiny when you press over them. And so a pressing cloth is a real aid. So this was kind of doing the same thing in that I don't want to iron on the front side of my fabric. It will flatten, it will change the appearance of it. Even the weave of it will flatten out and not look similar to the rest of my coat. So the trick of pressing from the back and of using that steam as my ally was super, super helpful. And I know not all of you have a Laura Star, but I bet lots of you have a steam iron and can perhaps figure out a way to do that. So try from the back or try a pressing cloth on the front. Super lightweight muslin will work for that. My mom used to sometimes use a well-worn tea towel that, would really allow that steam to penetrate. So that's that. What else? I think that's about it. Let's see what we have for comments. Did I mention the coat pattern? I think I did, but here it is one more time, the Noelle coat, Noelle, and it's by the So Chic company. That is the pattern I am using. Kat in Germany, awesome. Lissa, Angie, Deb, Goldie, Marilyn, hello from Pahrump. I love that. Anne, Mary Jo had to look that up. So good. Well, none of you have great tips for me this morning. Some of you have, by the way, over the course of these episodes, and I have instituted some of them. Like I changed from my initial quilting on the border, which was matching gray thread. I took that all out. That was the one step backwards, and it was a giant step backwards for mankind, let me tell you. A few hours of undoing. Totally worth it though, because now my border stitching is in shades of red, kind of darker red at the outer sides and going toward close to pink in the center. And I love, love, love it. So totally worth it. So I can't remember the name of the lady who gave me that suggestion to play with bright threads, but it was a great one. Someone else suggested the other day, and I thought I would just mention this in case you go back and read the YouTube comments and see that she asked. I had talked briefly about doing that same border idea, maybe in a smaller version on the cuffs of the sleeves. And I opted not to, and here's why. The way this pattern is constructed is that the back of the coat and the sleeve are all one piece. So there isn't a sleeve seam on the coat portion. And so I started quilting at the hemline to get that shape in place so that I could mark the hemline and put my quilting right there. But as you know, when you're quilting, the layers pull up a little bit, right? So I didn't think I had any realistic chance of also marking way out to the edge of the hemline of the sleeve and knowing exactly where that would land. So here's where the suggestion came into play. Someone said, well, why don't you quilt that separately and sew on a cuff piece? And absolutely, I could have. That was a great suggestion, and I might keep it in mind for a future coat. I opted not to for this one because already the level of complexity is taxing me a little bit, and I don't want to try all the new things all in the same coat. So I opted not to. My sleeves are just going to have the edge-to-edge gray quilted design. And I might just hold up a piece in case you guys are new today and haven't seen the whole coat. This is a front piece. I've serged around all the edges. And this is what the overall coat looks like. This hibiscus flower, it's one of my own freehand designs in gray thread on this gray tweedy fabric. And then all the way down to the bottom, there it comes. There's the hem with some threads. Anyway, you can see how the darker red is kind of top and bottom, a brighter red where the circles and bubbles are, and then that center kind of figure 8 part, I actually had an orangey red thread and a pink thread loaded at the same time through my needle and quilted that. So it's got this kind of sparkly, little bit pinkish tinge. Pink itself was a little much, but that worked well. Gave it a little life, a little sparkle. So that was cool. Angie, this is gonna be beautiful. I hope so. Yolanda from the Netherlands, welcome. Okay, so over the next few days, I will be checking back in. I'm trying to power through this coat. I am certainly not sewing on it every day, so don't let this make you think that you would have to sew for a solid week to make this coat. I have lots of other things going on in my life, but this is a little highlight of each day, is working on my coat a little bit more. And if you are interested in quilted coats, I'm going to do another live today, and it's going to be a very honest review of this little coat that I've talked about lately. It's a child's coat for my granddaughter, and it's called the Little Fox Coat. And I won't go into detail about it now, but this is another pattern by another designer, and I'm just gonna get on and do a very honest review of that pattern and the things that really worked well for me and some variations that I see that could make it easier. Well, I won't go into a ton of detail, but she has specific techniques for getting a specific reversible coat, and you don't have to go to those lengths if you don't want a reversible coat. So I thought it might be helpful to someone somewhere in the future making this Little Fox coat, and these same pattern designers also have a couple of other animals, and it might be helpful to see what I did and what I learned and what you might be able to apply to your coat. So if you're interested in that, while you're watching this one, look for the Little Fox Coat, an honest review. And if you are watching this live, check back in about 45 minutes and I'll be coming on air again and doing that. You guys are gonna get tired of hearing from me. Anne loves the quilting, awesome. Silly Sally, when you did double thread, were they both your normal Isacord 40 weight? Yes, they were. And I didn't have to change the needle or anything. I didn't change the tension either. So I had a 90-40, 90-14 needle loaded and it worked just fine. I didn't change the bobbin thread. I didn't change anything. When I did look at the coat after that was done, I see that I probably should have adjusted the tension a little. I got a bit of railroading in the curves of the figure eights. I did not worry about it because it looks great from the right side, and this is not going to show because it's all going to be lined. So I called it good. But if you were doing that, you might want to change the tension a little bit because you are getting a heavy top thread as an end result. Thanks you all for joining in. Do remember that a couple times a month, always on a Friday morning Pacific time, I come on YouTube and do a live stream of an actual quilting project, and one is coming up in a couple of days. So be on my newsletter to get some information about that. It'll be going out probably sometime this evening. But each time, usually on Wednesday, I'll send out a newsletter for the project that's coming up on Friday with a photograph of it and some topic ideas of what it will be about to give you a bit of an idea. So if you want to be on that newsletter and aren't yet, just go to my website, StitchedBySusan.com, and you'll get a little pop-up there that will invite you to join the newsletter. So I hope to see you there. I hope these episodes are helpful just to give you a behind-the-scenes look of some of the projects that I'm working on. And oh yeah, Mary Jo's reminding you, and I always forget to say this, I do appreciate if you give these episodes a thumbs up. If they're helpful to you, if you enjoy watching them, it helps YouTube to make them more visible to more people, and that's a great thing. So thanks for joining me, and I will catch you again next time.